This is Raul Ramirez of the Catch Wrestling Alliance. We're here to help you elevate your grappling ability, and together we will keep real wrestling alive. Thank you very much for joining us here on either YouTube or Twitch, or we're even streaming live on Twitter as well. Or if you're listening to us on whatever podcast platform you listen to us on, welcome. Thank you very much for your support and your time. I really appreciate it. One thing though, too, I guess we weren't on like Samsung podcasts, so I think we are on there now. That's weird. Because I think, from what I understand, is like a lot of the podcasts, uh, like uh, like apps and all that. All they do is they usually like look for podcasts and then just automatically put them on, and so or on their platform or whatever. But it wasn't the case for ours, and I guess I actually had to go in and like create an account with Samsung and whatnot. So anyway, it should be uploading now and all that. So I'm sure it should be on there soon, if not today, perhaps even tomorrow and stuff. So anyway, so there shouldn't be a place where you can't find us. Even we're available on Audible, that app from Amazon, and if you have Amazon Music as well, we're on there as well. So just to give you that update just in case you didn't know, and if that's more convenient for you, just so you know that, right? So um, just making everything easy for you, as best as we can, as easy as we can, right? Because we'll have people who want to train all over the country or the world, and maybe you can't train so easily, or you're not around LA, or you're not around South Carolina, like my buddy John Strickland. So we also have ways to train, through our website, catchwrestlingalliance.com. It is our CWA Academy, where you can at least begin online training. And hopefully one day you can go visit Los Angeles or my buddy John Strickland on the East Coast and train with either one of us. If you're around the United States. So with that being said, what about catch wrestling is confusing? Feel free to start asking questions at any time or make comments or whatever. But in my experience, I'll see some people. So like I've been working in different jiu-jitsu gyms for several years. Currently, I'm teaching at not only UCLA but also at a MMA gym called Fight Science MMA here in Los Angeles, and not just nowadays, but for many years, I would see or I'd hear comments where it's like someone who was doing jujitsu and they want to try wrestling or catch wrestling in particular. If they try it, then they find the movements confusing, which that is confusing. that comment is confusing to me, but I think not so much because I have been doing catch wrestling for so many years, but because of the nature of catch wrestling and catch wrestling movements and wrestling movements in particular, because they're actually the most logical, right? They're the most logical movements that fit the way humans move naturally, right? So let me elaborate. It's like hear me out, because that's the thing. I think right now, jujitsu is like very, very popular. Has been for a while now. So um, I think people are seeing these kinds of things, or even if they watch MMA, well, actually, for some reason, even if they watch MMA, they still start thinking about like being on their back and stuff, even though wrestling dominates and the whole ground and pound thing dominates MMA and stuff. So that's just like this weird disconnect. I think it could just be because jiu-jitsu is so popular that people start seeing things from the jiu-jitsu perspective, right? And then when they see something that's actually more logical, like wrestling or catch wrestling in particular, they're confused by it, right? So what do I mean by something that's more logical, right? So let's think about like babies. So if any of you ever had a baby or seen or know anything about baby development, right? Human baby right? A lot of times, like after they're born, they can't do much, right? They can't control their body well enough yet. They're unable to do so many things. So the parents have to keep the babies face up, right? They usually let them lie down face up. And then as they develop, then they develop the ability to roll over. So they go face down. So usually they're laying down like this, right? And then they actually develop bridging ability so that they can turn, right? So they do in wrestling we call a hip heist, right? So they don't they like they're only on their back because they can't move, right? So it's not that they want to be there, but once they develop the ability to get off their back, to hip heist, basically, so to kind of get a little bridge going, right, and then so they have enough room for their their shoulders to swivel underneath them, then they start rolling over, so their belly is down, right? So um, that's kind of one of the most or one of the early things in child development that occurs, right? So this whole notion about getting off your back is one of the most like fundamental things that happen in our lives, right? And so that's kind of one of the things where it's like when people are like confused about getting off your back and all that, then it's like, babies want to do this. It's like this is one of the things that you've actually been doing since infancy. And also the notion of say like bridging. Kids often like even if they're upset about stuff, they'll kind of bridge and like say if they don't want to be held, they start bridging out. they start suplexing themselves out of someone's arms or whatever. So these movements are very fundamental. Okay, so then after a baby not only develops the ability to go belly down, then later, as their limbs get longer and they develop more abilities, then they develop the ability to crawl, right? So to get onto their hands and knees, and then to crawl around where they can't quite walk yet, but they still want to be going places, and so they'll crawl. So the hands and knees position is what we often refer to, at least in the United States, as referee's position, right? Or sometimes it's called like defensive position, because it is in wrestling and in catch wrestling one of the most effective defense positions that exists, right? So much so that I saw it was like on that one jiu-jitsu website. It was like jiu-jitsu Eastern Europe. And that one's really popular. I often see their articles like circulating online a lot. And so there's one where it's like some guy, I think his name was Raul too, right? But some European dude, I think he was using wrestling defensive position, right? So I think they're calling it turtle guard, right? Because that's their framework, right? So um, he was using that to win tournaments, right? So he would turtle up or get into a referee's position, but just more hunched down, and then as he would counter his opponents as they would attack him or as they would try to roll him over out of his turtled position. He would go for leg locks or different types of submissions, and now he's selling his own like whatever instructional videos about how he did all that, right? So again, it is this movement is natural, and it is one of the things that we develop early on in our development as we grow, right? As from infancy to becoming a toddler, and then ultimately becoming an adult. But then I think a lot of times it's through popularity or or marketing and all that. Then you get to the point where people are so kind of removed or from their understanding of the way their body moves. So then they will like they'll switch to this understanding that's like the big or kind of like the mainstream grappling understanding. So then they'll fall onto their back or stay on their back, pulling guard, or just different things like that. So not to say that you can't get some good submissions or some good counters there, because every position is not terrible, right? It's not like it's going to be completely ineffective. But even if we look at a lot of jiu-jitsu tournaments, ultimately, if there's a point system, the point system favors the person on top, right? If you get the takedown, you get points. If you pass guard, you get points, right? Even like taking the back, I can consider that, like if they turtle and you're able to take the guard, you're still getting points, right? So these things, or even like say some of these pro grappling tournament or grappling events you'll see like on Flow Grappling and whatnot that are submission only, they'll have a time limit, and if the competitors grapple the full time and there's no winner, quite often it'll go to judge's decision, and the judge's decision is pretty much it always goes with the person who was like on top the most, right? Who was attacking the most, and then being on top kind of makes it look like you're attacking the most, right? So they'll be winning, right? So ultimately, these types of movements are more logical, and I think people are not, or like have this disconnect, right? Like where if they look at wrestling or catch wrestling in particular, then they'll be like, this is kind of confusing, and then they'll just stick with jujitsu, and they'll be doing like moves that require like so many steps, right? Like a lot of steps to even get to the final submission point or whatever. So not to say this stuff is ineffective and whatnot, but because I also, I also train in jujitsu, like a lot of no gi stuff, and um, I enjoy it and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, there is this difference, and so that's why I wanted to talk today about that. Like ultimately, catch wrestling is still the most logical, even though it is like not in the mainstream so much. You're hearing it more and more. I think there's also maybe like a distorted understanding. So you have the most random person talk about catch wrestling as though they're an expert or as though they really know it, but so you are hearing it more and more, and but it's not exactly the most well understood art, right? All right. Okay, let's go ahead and get to some of your questions here, or some of your comments. Nick Allen, man, you guys got to start opening up more gyms to train at. I'd love to train some catch, but I'm stuck with BJJ. Sorry, Nick. Really sorry to hear that. If you're ever in Los Angeles or Southern California, please stop by. Or also, you can visit my buddy John Strickland on the East Coast in South Carolina. He's in the northern part of the state, so see if you can make the pilgrimage. Mike Hunt. When I was in my early 20s, I was looking up martial arts that could defeat BJJ, and I discovered Sakuraba. Yeah, speaking of Sakuraba, like, have you seen, like, Mike, have you seen this? So I can't remember. I think there's like some T-shirt, or there's some popular like image that's circulating. Even around, it's amongst jiu-jitsu people. I think it's some jiu-jitsu brand. They put it on a T-shirt where it's like, in a world of Gracie's, be a Sakuraba, but it's like a jiu-jitsu shirt. So it's like, so I think this kind of illustrates like this whole disconnect thing where it's like, the mainstream thing is jujitsu, and they don't, people even who made that Sakuraba image, like don't quite realize, or maybe even the people who are wearing it, or even there's so many people in jujitsu who are wearing the Sakuraba rash guard from the brand Scramble. So many people are wearing the Sakuraba rash guard, but then they're just like only doing jujitsu and whatnot. So it's like it could be like, say, like Nick Allen, who commented about like wanting to learn catch wrestling, but jujitsu is the only thing around. But I think quite often it is this idea where they don't even know that soccer, they don't know catch wrestling, or maybe they've heard it. They're not there. They don't really make the connection between Sakuraba and catch wrestling, or Sakuraba having trained not only with Billy Robinson but with Roy Wood, who's still the lineage holder from the great legendary coach Billy Riley, who was like the founder of what's now called the Snake Pit in Wigan. So Roy Wood is still there. He's still teaching. They're still doing a lot of stuff out in Wigan, England. So it's like the disconnect is so kind of like vast. It's really bizarre, right? especially those of you here who are watching this or listening to this, like you are, it seems like you already understand a lot more than the average person. So then, I don't know if this is bizarre to you to see just like the idea or these things that people are saying about that just don't quite match up with the history and even movement wise or the art wise, like how they think that some of these fundamental movements are so confusing when they're so natural, right? When they're so much part of the way humans move, right? Okay, another comment from Mike Hunt. It's a shame no catch wrestling schools are in my area, but only hot singles. That is a real a real shame, Mike. Um, uh, yeah. Well, maybe you can start a hot singles catch wrestling club. All right. Next question, Mike Hunt. I did pick up a Billy Robinson DVD called War. Great wrestling tips. Yes. Yep. A lot of Billy Robinson stuff's really, really good. Yep. Let me know if you have any specific questions about that or whatever. But yeah, I'm glad you enjoy that. Mike Hunt, sumo is underrated. I agree. I agree, like 100%. It's almost like, say, like nowadays, what Eddie Bravo made that submission or what combat jujitsu, where they allow slaps, but it's like slaps were always in sumo wrestling, so you'll often see some knockouts and whatnot. It's just they don't go onto the ground. So if someone falls down, then the match is over in sumo wrestling. But either way, sometimes you'll actually get some knockouts, which are pretty amazing because you see these big guys just like knock each other out. It's pretty intense, right? And actually the pace is usually very, very fast, very intense. So that's why it's so easy to lose, because if any part of your body besides the bottoms of your feet touch the ground, you lost. So usually all they have to do is kind of snap you down. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. And the other thing that's exciting about it is that the professional sumo is like they have a very difficult tournament, right? And so they have what, like 3 or 4 tournaments a year, and they're each of them are 15 days long. So whoever is the winningest competitor after 15 days is the winner of the tournament. So it's very, very difficult. So yes, it is underrated. Mike Hunt, what do you think about adding weight classes to sumo? Um, I don't know. Then we wouldn't really have like these really cool instances where it's like you have a tiny guy beating a big guy. It's still like not the norm, right? But you have some really good smaller guys who do very, very well. Yeah, we just wouldn't have that anymore. I haven't really been upset about it enough to say either way. I think I just kind of accept that the way it is. The thing about sumo though that I would want to change is, for those of you who watch, it's like I try to watch like every tournament, and you'll see these guys take unnecessary injuries, right, because of the way their platform is set up, right? So they have this clay platform that's maybe about 2.5 to 3 feet tall or whatever, and they don't really. I'm sure they have some kind of padding around the perimeter of that platform, which is also small because the guys are quite large, right? So then a lot of guys are taking these extra few feet falls like onto the backs of their heads, or on, like sometimes they'll land in a weird way, or the opponent falls on them as they fall down, so it's like extra weight on you. um, so I just think if they could find a better way, or maybe even have the platform not as tall, or more better padding around the platform, or something. I think there's some way to make that safer, because since there is slapping and there's knockouts and there's kind of almost like they call it forearm shivers, or it's almost like a pro wrestling kind of elbow, where it's like it's not like a straight up like Muay Thai elbow where you're trying to like cut their face or whatever, but it's kind of like an elbow that's kind of on the side of your forearm elbow area, where you're kind of hitting more with the muscle part. So it's still very painful. So they're already taking like a lot of head trauma, like a lot of hits to the head, a lot of slams to the head, because they're supposed to, like, right when you begin the match, you're supposed to slam into the other person as hard as you can. So they're taking all this impact, and then to have to take some unnecessary impact. I think that it's like you got to minimize that, right? Because you're already taking so much damage. That's already going to it's already going to like decrease your longevity in that sport. So like just try to minimize that like unnecessary damage to the athletes. That would just be my thing. I don't mind the difference in weight class, or if there's, I don't mind that there's no real weight class, but just like minimize this extra damage. That would be my perspective. Sword tune. When I started out wrestling / BJJ, I relied on referee Turtle to stall people who were much better than me. Sword tune. Next comment. I lasted a lot longer than I should have. Yes, right. You see how well. So taking Sword Tune's perspective, right? So then a beginner can then defend for a lot longer than like how it's mentioned right there than they should have, right? So that's why sometimes it's called defense position, right? Because you can bear weight better, right? So if you're on your hands and knees, you can bear a lot of weight, right? If you're on your back, belly up, you cannot. We're not designed to be bearing weight that way, like on our chests and belly. We can get. That's why there are those compression chokes, right? Where if someone you're basically pinning someone, you put all your weight on their ribs and you pull their neck and head up where you're pinning them and you're driving your ribs into their ribs, then it can constrict their rib cage so that it makes it very difficult to breathe. And then if you're pulling their head into your body, right, then you're kind of smothering them as well. So it just makes life difficult because we're not designed to be bearing weight that way. We're designed to bear weight on our backs, right? So backs and legs, right? Lifting with your legs, right? That's what they always talk about, right? And then also being able to bear weight on our backs, right? That's how come, that's how come we get piggyback rides or whatever. But it's basically we're more structurally sound that way for bearing weight. And so then we have here from the comment from Sword Tune is that as a beginner, they were able to defend. And even though they might, at that time as a beginner, you don't know very many techniques, you don't know very many counters, which from the defensive position or referee's position, there are so many counters. Like I mentioned earlier, we had some European guy that appeared in the Eastern European Jiu-Jitsu website. He did very, very well. Or he does very well in jiu-jitsu competition using his turtle guard, right? So it's like getting into turtle or a defensive position and countering from there, whether it be leg locks or double wrist locks or all kinds of counters where you can end up back on top of the person or you can put them into a submission hold. So all these things are very, very like fundamental movements, right? So going back to my original point, right? So those of you who might have just joined later, where a lot of these movements that we see in wrestling are the movements that we develop or as part of human development over time, right? So, but primarily as infancy, right? So babies, they can't roll over; they just physically cannot roll over, and then as they gain strength and stuff, then they gain the ability to bridge and hip heist, and so that they can go belly down. And then once they develop even further, then they can develop the ability to get into referee's position, and they start their journey to crawling and then walking and whatnot. So same thing even for wrestling. So say if you wanted to escape, or even for a self-defense situation, so say if someone throws you down and you want to get back up, where you just want to run away from that person or run away from the situation, being back down or belly up, right, and they're pinning you, it's much more difficult to get up and run away if you're belly up, right? But if you get like your back So if you get back onto all fours, which we're seeing this a lot, even in MMA, where people are getting taken down and they start getting back to all fours, and a lot of times they'll go up against the cage wall, right? They get back onto all fours, and then all of a sudden they're back to standing. This is because of those movements where it's like you'll get to, so if you're on your, get thrown back onto your back, roll over all fours, it's easier to get back to standing, so you can, so you can throw your knockout kick, right? So so I kind of want everyone who's at least listening or watching now that to see these things, because they I think people are like I said earlier, it's like there's this disconnect where people aren't seeing or they're not realizing that they're seeing these movements in action. And I think you are seeing these movements in action in MMA more and more, because a lot of people they're just getting up like that now, right? Because not only is it more structurally sound, it's easier, and you can kind of block some of the strikes and stuff. Like even gaining wrist control, you can stop a lot of the strikes and a lot of the submission, like the rear naked choke attempts. Mike Hunt, has anyone developed effective striking from the ground? I don't know, because you can't really get some good. It's like if you're on your back, face up, you have the odd like knockout or whatever from time to time. A lot of times, someone who's still kind of hitting or trying to throw some short elbows strikes to their opponent when they're when they're on their back. A lot of times it doesn't knock the person out, but the commentators will talk about how at least they're still being active. So they're still kind of moving about, but not necessarily knocking someone out. There was one that I remember. I'm sure there are probably more than that, but there was one kind of highlight knockout. It was like the Andrei Arlovsky, when the heavyweight from UFC. But this is back a long, long time ago when, when he was still like one of the, when he was still really, really big at that time. I believe he got thrown back, and he put someone in guard, and I think he was able to knock them out like from his back. So but either way, I don't think there's, like, besides these kinds of rare instances, I don't think there's like so much of an effective striking system from that, because you definitely lose a lot of power because you won't have so much of waist rotation and stuff that you can do from there. Sword tune. Actually, well, one more thing on that point, where it's like you can just gouge their eyes. Just gouge their eyes, bro. It's depending on the situation, if like you're self-defense, yeah, you could totally try to hit the vital points on your opponent, Okay, next question. Sword tune. In other martial arts, I know Silat has some kicks from the ground similar to capoeira. Yes, this is true. But I don't practice those, so I can't say much on them. All right. Yes, there's a lot of ground strikes in these styles, but quite often it is like where you turn a little bit more belly down, or you'll have to have some distance, right, to kind of kick the leg out or something like that. If they've thrown you back, like onto your back, you'll still almost like some of the jiu-jitsu sweeps. Yeah, so something like that, where maybe you can kind of put your foot on their knee, kick that out as you roll them over, some stuff like that. There are some maybe more offensive strikes and stuff, but still nothing like, I wouldn't say anything that's too comprehensive, because you just don't have the I guess the leverage. You won't have the waist rotation and stuff that, like, if you're standing up to throw a punch or kick, really that waist rotation is what gives you all that power. It gives you the ability to knock the other person out, or to daze them, or to just hurt them, right? So it's not quite there when you're on your back, right? But that's why it's like, say if you're on top and you're using gravity, and you can get a little bit more of that waist rotation to drop a strike onto your opponent, from up to down, then that's much more devastating, right? You got all those physics and all that on your side. All right, sword tune. I must go to dinner, but I enjoyed hearing from you. all the best. Thank you for supporting us all these years. I see your comments from time to time, so thank you. Um, yeah, thanks everyone for supporting us, because yeah, quite often, um, I don't see everyone's comment, but like I see a bunch of them, right? So it's nice to see the same names come up over and over. It's really cool. It's really cool. So let us know, if there's any questions you might have about our style, and see if we can answer them in the form of a video. There's a few that I want to be doing, or there's a few that I want to come out sooner than later. So hopefully you can get those filmed for you. Jonathan Jimenez, catch rules. I believe you are correct. You are correct, sir. The catch is really, really great. All right. So for those of you who might have just tuned in, all right. So talking about catch wrestling being a little bit more logical, or actually the most logical version of grappling, and mostly opposed, or like mostly in contrast to jiu-jitsu, since jiu-jitsu is the most popular grappling style right now. So what I was saying earlier is that, like, over the years, even though I've worked at different jiu-jitsu gyms and MMA gym, and just different scenarios, I will hear the comment that people who come from a jiu-jitsu background, they're confused by a lot of the wrestling movements, wrestling positions, but these are the movements that are natural in human development, right? So hip heisting, so going from our back to our belly, going from our belly to our hands and knees. These are the things that we developed first as infants to toddlers. So it is very human to do these moves, right? So ultimately there's this disconnect where people might feel that they are confused by um, like these types of movements, right? All right, Mike Hunt. How does one stop his body from getting ruined from catch over a lifetime? Well, it would be not unlike jiu-jitsu as well. The thing is about, again, doing the different self-care type or self-maintenance type things, where making sure you're doing strength and conditioning, and also flexibility training, making sure you have good partners, because you can still go really hard, especially in grappling, since you're not striking. You can still roll pretty hard, but just watch some of the neck cranks or some of the leg lock stuff. So it shouldn't necessarily be so devastating, but you definitely have to do some of the self-maintenance stuff. Yeah. So Jonathan Jimenez. Yet wrestling came naturally, and it fit my way of doing things. So Jonathan has a top-down approach, right? Right. Yeah, and also Jonathan Jimenez mentions, like, especially healthy foods and don't stop moving and all that. So, like all these kinds of strength conditioning, stretching stuff is just vitally important, and that will definitely increase your longevity. And then the diet, so eating as many vegetables as you can, that will really, really help you over time. Jonathan Jimenez, you'll be in more pain stopping when you're going forward than when you are going forward. Yeah, I think he means, like, you don't stop training, right? So if you take that break, it doesn't mean you can, like doesn't mean you can't take a break, right? But if you just stop, and then you, like, years later, then you want to try to get back to it, that's going to be difficult. But you just got to keep moving. And this is one of the things, even like medically speaking, ultimately people, like, this is a big thing at least in our country, in the United States, that research comes out all the time talking about how bad it is for people to have jobs where they just sit down all day. All that stuff ruins, like, it can shorten your ligaments. It can, because you're in a seated position where you are, you're not standing upright. So you're so many hours just, like, in this position where we should be moving and, like, doing all these things, at least, taking breaks to move. But a lot of people just don't do that. and so it can hurt your body over time. Mike Hunt, how important is strength? Strength isn't the most important thing, but if we're talking about your health and your longevity and like minimizing your risk of injury, then it is more important for those things than for winning a catch wrestling match, right? Ultimately, having so like we're talking about like structural strength, right? So you're stronger if you're in a defensive position or like the referee's position, like on all hands and knees bearing the weight. It's easier for you to bear weight than if you were on your back and someone's pinning you, right, and like driving their ribs down through through your chest, and pulling your head up and smothering you with their chest. Um so that isn't so much strength. You're just using gravity to just like pin and smother and smash your opponent who's on the bottom, right? So strength isn't that important for like offensively, but for self-preservation, right? Defending your joints and all that, then that's what the strength and conditioning is really all about. A number code. Hello, number code. Is it 9341602? Have you ever researched Russian Sambo? What's your thoughts compared to catch wrestling? I like not wearing any kind of jacket. So that'd be the other thing. And so then they might have some wrestling aspect to it. But quite often in the videos that I've seen, they will be kind of going into leg locks and whatnot, which is totally fine. But it seems as though it's just a little bit less wrestling oriented than catch wrestling. So that's about it. I don't really spend too much time looking at it. Taquero Man 91. Do head scissors only work from the ground? And scarf hold, can you get there from mount or back? Yeah, you can set up all kinds of scissors. So you just got to practice getting there. If that's what you want to do, I mean, you can totally, you can totally get there. So not sure exactly what position specifically you're talking about, like from the back or whatever, but I'm sure there's a way. Mike Hunt, are you saying BJJ has unnatural movement? What I'm saying, it is not the most natural when we're talking about. So like my premise was that so people often say that catch wrestling movements are confusing, especially if they come from a jiu-jitsu background. But my point is that they're not confusing, and they're actually some of the most natural movements, right? So that was my point. So you can still do, like I said, there's still submissions that you can get from your back. That's totally fine, but like with regards to defense and say if you want to get back up to standing, we are seeing not only in self-defense but in MMA situations where people are actually not necessarily staying in guard. They're actually rolling over, going to the referee's position, then going to what's called like quad pod, and then they're able to stand back up, so they're back to striking. Yeah, number code. Hi, yes, number code, and thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you for watching and listening, and thank you for your question. Yeah, so ultimately that was my main point, where it's like I think just maybe because of the popularity of jiu-jitsu, then you'll see these ideas, or actually even it was like I think over a month ago now, one of the live streams that we did was talking about wrestling myths, right? So even especially as a white belt in jiu-jitsu, they often talk about like, oh, don't give your back or whatever, or don't go to, sometimes even like to not go to turtle. It'd be better to put the person back into your guard. These types of things, the people will be hearing, right? Especially if they're beginners, then a lot of times their coaches are telling them these principles And so then those get ingrained in their minds, so that kind of affects the way they think. And then when they go to like a wrestling or a catch wrestling class, then when we talk about like, oh well, it's actually beneficial to give your back or to go to a referee's position, or um, all kind. Oh, it's like, don't necessarily waste your time in guard. It's like these kinds of things that then kind of create this kind of like cognitive dissonance for that practitioner, right? So say someone like Jonathan Jimenez, who's commenting in the comment section, like I think he already had kind of like this top-down approach to grappling. He has a karate background too, so he's used to starting from standing up anyway. So then, even though he did spend a lot of time doing jiu-jitsu, when he got to catch wrestling, then he realized that was even more natural, right? So I think because he already had this outside perspective, right? All right, Mike Hunt, boxing and catch, best combination. I think that the Chinese kickboxing is the ultimate combination, like the sanda, but boxing and catch wrestling is a really great combination too. I must admit, right? But since I did the Chinese kickboxing, so Chinese kickboxing or sanda or sansho, it has kind of a lot of wrestling takedowns in it, but plus the punching and kicking. So that's what I like the best. But boxing is really good too, especially if you don't want to be like kicking and stuff, like giving your leg to the person. Then boxing is cool too, right? Taquero Man 91. How do rankings work in catch wrestling? Well, there's really no ranking. It's usually just how much time you put in, and but we'll have, say, like even on our CWA Academy, that's our online platform where you can learn online. We will do levels, right? So the way it's set up on our platform is that when you join, you get access to a lot of videos, but you have to then demonstrate to me the fundamentals techniques. And then once you show that you know those, then you'll get more access to different lessons. So you'll get access to more and more things as you progress, right? But ultimately, you got to be very proficient with a lot of the fundamental movements. So that's what's going to make you the better wrestler, and that's going to show like just how advanced you really are. Right. So, but I think people have different kinds of ranking systems. I believe also my buddy on John Strickland on the East Coast has his own kind of level systems, and but there's no real belts and stuff like jiu-jitsu. Because even boxing, like I think since Mike Hunt mentioned boxing earlier, it's like, are people thinking about the ranking system in boxing? There's no belts, right? You just do it. You just practice until you get better and better. If you want to compete, you can see how you do, and kind of like that. Like, just go train. All right. Taquero Man 91. Any places you would like to travel to grapple, like Senegal? One place that where their wrestling style is very similar to catch wrestling that I might be interested, not might be, I would be interested in going to check out would be in India. I guess northern India is where they do the Kushti wrestling, where they wrestle in the sand. A lot of their movements are closer to catch wrestling than even a lot of definitely a freestyle wrestling in the Olympics, and definitely folk style too. Because folk style and freestyle, they just have more and more points, and freestyle they start pancaking out and all that. So, but in Kushti wrestling, you'll see them do a lot of counter moves and stuff from the referee's position or the defensive position. So just like we were talking about earlier, it's like they're using these things, they're putting these things into practice. And so there's a lot of cool videos, even on YouTube. You can see them training and stuff. So a lot, they will show a lot of cool techniques that are just their catch wrestling fundamental techniques. And it's cool because you see how effective they are. Very, very cool. It's actually before COVID, before the pandemic, I did spend some time in southern China, like uh, southwestern China, above Vietnam, and the traditional tribal people that live there, they're called the E people. They have a tradition of wrestling too, and it's very similar in that they'll in the villages they'll set up sand pit arenas, and you can wrestle there. But their wrestling is, I would say, it's a little bit further from kushti, and it's closer to freestyle wrestling. So someone who does freestyle, which like, so that what they do is, like, since it's their pastime there, um, there's a lot of betting and stuff on the wrestling matches and stuff. So as a wrestler, you can win money, and so, but there will be no points, and you have to pin the person or just dominate them. If because there will be a time limit. They won't let you go like forever, right? So, um, so that can be kind of similar to kushti, but I think because of the prevalence of freestyle in China, then I think you're seeing, or at least when I was there, it seemed like a little bit closer to freestyle than catch wrestling, or even kushti. Yeah. Ziggle 314. I have just started watching your videos, and I am very interested in pursuing catch wrestling further. How do I find a school, or who should I be watching? All right. Watch our videos. You can also join our online platform through our website, catchwrestlingalliance.com. The other person that I don't know if he's really puts videos on YouTube, but it's John Strickland on the East Coast. He's in South Carolina, and his organization is called American Hook Wrestling. All right, so make sure you check him out. I think he's going to be putting stuff onto Patreon. We will have him on soon so he can talk about it, because I think the whole Patreon thing is like a new thing for him. So I got to check if he's got everything up there yet. Okay, Mike Hunt. Ever tried Turkish oil wrestling? Nah, no. We talk about that. Everyone. The Turkish oil wrestling. The longer the conversation goes, like the Turkish oil wrestling comes out, right? No, that seems somewhat difficult, and very slippery. Very slippery. 3941602. Do you need a background in wrestling, say like in high school, to do catch wrestling? No, it actually could potentially like poison your brain, right? You'll think you're like so great, you know, um, and then you might not want to learn like some of the submission holds and whatnot, and then um, so then you won't necessarily learn the catch wrestling style, but you'll just be doing your folk style, which isn't bad, and you can get you very, very far, but it will it could affect depending on your ego, right? If you're willing to learn, then it can help you learn faster, but the folk style movements, still, they're not cognizant of the submission holds, because submission holds are barred, so you can like unconsciously be putting yourself into submission holds, or putting yourself at risk of getting submitted, just by doing the folk style, right? So if you do have that, so it's not necessary, but if you do have folk style, freestyle background, just be humble and try to learn the moves, because the catch wrestling moves would be cognizant of the possible submission counters, right, that you would not be used to, right? So this is what I see a lot. So like, since I train at 10th Planet in West LA, you see all these kinds of like high school or collegiate wrestlers come in, and they get submitted by like the blue belts, or the lower ranking people who don't have any wrestling background. That there. I mean, I'm sure it's not just happening at where I train, right? It's happening all over the country or all over the world. Um, so you don't need to have a wrestling background to train and catch wrestling, and it might even be better if you don't, right? Because then you'll be humble, and you'll learn, like you'll learn the technique, like the way to do the techniques that are still cognizant, or like you'll they still take into consideration a submission counter, right? That's not present in freestyle or folk style. Mike Hunt. Sorry, it's scrolling. If you want to learn wrestling, just roll around the floor like a baby, right? That's a good way to put it, actually. Whether it was a joke or not, it's kind of the idea, and that's kind of my point. We're talking about, like, in human development, it's like that's what happens. We start on our backs, right? You're supposed to put the baby on their back, and then later on, they develop the ability to bridge. Actually, they develop the ability to bridge really fast. So bridging is very, very natural, and then they hip heist, so they can roll themselves over, belly down, and then later they get to referee's position. And this is all natural development. They can start moving forward, right, by crawling, and then they can get to standing, right? So this is very, very natural. 3941602, does catch come from Britain? Have you ever heard of Bartitsu, British stick fighting? Who knew Britain has martial arts? Yes, catch wrestling does come from Britain. I have not heard of Bartitsu, but yes, there were a lot of regional martial art styles in England. Right, so very, very similar to other parts of the world. It's like martial arts have not only been a way to defend yourself, but they've been a form of entertainment, since the dawn of time. So, there's all kinds of grappling styles. We even talked about sumo earlier, right? In today's live stream, right? 00. How far can I progress in catch wrestling with no catch wrestling school nearby? Ideally, if you can find like a wrestling dummy or wrestling partner, or maybe you can basically learn from our videos, and then maybe if you can make the pilgrimage, right, to Los Angeles, or my buddy on the East Coast, John Strickland, you can definitely progress. It kind of reminds me of, like, say, like learning a language, right? When you say, like, if you're learning Spanish, right, and then at least you'll be like, if you take a class, you'll be exposed to some of the grammar, some of the vocabulary. But then if you ever get the chance to, like, say, go to a Spanish speaking country where you're just immersed there, then that kind of helps you to learn faster, where you have to use it for survival and all that. But it doesn't mean that, like, doing the whole book learning or like video learning didn't help you. It actually did help kind of create some of the foundation there, so that once you're immersed and once you're present in the environment, you won't be completely lost, right? So it's still good to learn from video. And then but once you can make the pilgrimage, then you got to immerse yourself. Mike Hunt, the marketing behind Chinese and Brazilian martial arts is better. That's why Western martial arts are unknown. Yeah, or even, like, say, like Japanese, right? The karate and all that. Yeah, or even Taekwondo. So some of these Asian martial arts, where now they're in the Olympics and all that. So judo and all that. Correct. That's correct. Yeah, because there's all different kinds of Western. So basically, so like I said, like, there's combat sports popular since the dawn of time. So regardless to the where on the earth you lived, there's some ways to entertain yourself doing some kind of combat sport. Agosto Dalla. Baritsu is a mix of jiu-jitsu, boxe français, French cane, and wrestling. Interesting. Dan Zena, I want to see a catch wrestler be in the elite of MMA, specifically in the UFC, the pinnacle of MMA. Think it can happen? Any potential names? I believe it can happen. It's just he's got to get someone who like wants to devote their time, even though, like, amateur wrestling does very, very well in MMA. You'll still get people who are just like, I gotta do jiu-jitsu, so they would still prefer spending some time doing jiu-jitsu or even amateur wrestling over catch wrestling. It's just like, you'll see there's the disconnect that we've been talking about this whole almost a whole hour now. Taquero Man 91. What tools did you use to help with your learning of catch wrestling? Well, I did several different grappling styles. I even competed in sumo wrestling even before um, I was able to go to Wigan and train, also to train with Billy Robinson and privately in Arkansas and all that. So I did have a martial arts background. So almost like the whole idea that I just mentioned, where it's like even if you have some kind of, even if you're watching some videos where you're learning some of the fundamental movements, then it will give you some sort of a background or some sort of a foundation. And then if you stay humble, or and you just try to like humbly learn what they're trying to teach you, then you can absorb it, right? You'll at least have some coordination, right? So these movements aren't completely foreign. All right. Mike Hunt. I want to say Mark Hunt because of that kickboxer from Pride, and he also fought in UFC. Anyway, Mike Hunt. Wrestling was international. Kings used to wrestle other kings. Right? Catch's origins come from sailors, apparently. That's not exactly true. That's one of the myths of catch wrestling that's kind of going around. There are some waves of immigration that came from the mainland Europe and stuff like that, but it was a style developed in Lancashire region. It wasn't necessarily from the sailors. No, that was something I did see spread, but yeah, that's not exactly correct. Mike Hunt. Bassroon pretty much taught himself wrestling with one other dude. Yep. Yep. All right. Okay, so go ahead and keep on asking questions, and then but so for those of you who are listening or whatever, really appreciate it. So we were talking about like ultimately catch wrestling movements being the most logical, right? Because it's these are the movements that we've been doing since we were infants, right? And then to become toddlers, and then eventually to walk, right? These are the types of movements that make us human, right? So they are the most logical. It's just that there's just been a disconnect where people just because of like the marketing from other grappling styles, and they think that is like the way to do things. And then when they see catch wrestling, then it just gets confusing, right? Um, yeah. All right, Mike Hunt. Thanks for the info. I threw a few bucks in super chat, but it all went to my petrol tank. Yeah, understandable. Gas price is way too high now. Okay, but so for those of you who say you might want to learn, I mentioned a few times CWA Academy on our website, catchwrestlingalliance.com. Also, if you just want to contribute, you don't necessarily want to learn the style, you just appreciate what we're doing, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. We have a lot of videos that you would get access to there. Some sparring, we have a really cool presentation we did in the home of Frank Gotch, one of the best American catch wrestlers who ever lived. So yeah, a bunch of stuff. We even have like alternate endings, right? So like the video that we put out on YouTube, like maybe we'll have some submission ending there, and then we'll add an alternate submission ending in the behind the paywall, so the members only can view that. So we try to make it special, right? We'll just keep adding more stuff, so you can always support us that way. Just check it out. Anything's appreciated. I understand how how Mike mentioned the petrol being very expensive. It is very expensive right now. So all right, so hopefully we can all survive the inflation together. All right, so I think we'll go ahead and call it a day. Thank everyone for listening, and just know we're available Twitch, any kind of now on Samsung, I believe, the Samsung podcast app and all that, Audible, of course, iTunes or Apple, whatever. So Yeah, so it should be easy. So thank you for listening or watching wherever you do. All right. So, we're here just to help you elevate your grappling, and together we're going to keep real wrestling alive.